Good morning and welcome to our webinar on modern hybrid cloud backup with Rubrik and Azure, presented jointly by AHEAD, Rubrik, and Microsoft. Today we're joined by Solutions Principal Nick Collier of AHEAD, Technical Engineer Rebecca Fitzhugh of Rubrik, and Azure Specialist Amy Manley of Microsoft. These presenters will give you an overview of what's required in a modern data backup solution for Azure. They'll cover the use cases for backup and disaster recovery, VM conversion, and backing up workloads running in Azure with Rubrik. And then they'll show you how it all works through a series of demos. Before I turn things over to them, just a couple of logistical reminders. We do want to hear your questions, but we'll do the Q&A at the end of the session. If you have questions throughout, submit them using the appropriate tab on your BrightTalk screen. Also, we'll be posting some live polls throughout the presentation, so we'd appreciate if you would chime in with some answers as those poll questions pop up. All right, so without further delay, let me turn things over to our speakers. Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny, and thanks everyone for joining today. Just some quick intros for us. So as Jenny mentioned, my name is Nick Collier. I'm the Solutions Principal at AHEAD, and I lead our practice for Cloud and DevOps. Over 10 years of automation experience, and just really excited to be accompanied by Rebecca and Amy today to really share not just how we do things with backup in a modern hybrid cloud environment, but some of the automation techniques as well that Amy's going to show you at the end and how we stitch everything together. So let me pass over to Rebecca to introduce herself.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Rebecca Fitzhugh. I'm an engineer at Rubrik. I'm a part of the technical marketing team, and so I have kind of a unique position where I get to do fun things like this, like present with Nick and Amy. But a good majority of my time is spent in the field talking to customers, talking to prospects, and just kind of the general public about our technology, and then taking that information, feeding it back to product, and seeing how we can make basically pipe dreams become realities. And Amy?
And I'm Amy Manley, and I'm really happy to be here with Nick and Rebecca since they're webinar pros. And I've been with Microsoft for a little over, 7-8 months. But my background's in virtualization and automation, and I'm a 5-time V-expert. Nothing else that's really super cool, like a VCDX or anything. But
matter of perspective.
Okay, so to get started, here's kind of the agenda that we have for today. I'm going to give a quick overview of the Enterprise Cloud Delivery Framework that we have at AHEAD. Then we're going to go into some intros, and then look at an update from Azure, from Amy, and then Rebecca's going to give an intro to Rubrik for anyone not familiar there as well. And then our goal is, after we kind of get through the slides, is just jump straight into some demos and talk about some of the techniques for backing up your cloud environments and backing up to the cloud. So to kind of get started, so this is our AHEAD Enterprise Cloud Delivery Framework. For anyone not familiar with AHEAD, this is our go-to-market. This is how we look at cloud as a whole. And as you can see, if you look at kind of that middle layer there, we look at everything from the data center all the way to public cloud. We don't really look at this as use the term hybrid cloud anymore. We really look at this as your enterprise cloud. So on top of that, we've got cloud management techniques we want to put on top of that. We've got DevOps tool chains and process optimization and automation we build for people, as well as a whole focus around security and risk. But the big thing that really differentiates us, and why I'm glad again to be joined by Microsoft and Rubrik today, is really because these focus areas are so important to us right now. Data protection and availability continues to be one of the top questions we get asked about. Automation, orchestration, and APIs are really how we stitch all this together. And what we look for with products that we bring into the cloud delivery framework is, do they have an open and accessible API that we can do more creative things with? And then it goes without saying that Azure, on the right-hand side of public cloud, is just one of the fastest growing platforms that we see workloads being moved to right now. And the great thing is, when we couple these together, is what you'll see what Amy's built later on around kind of Azure Automation and how we can use SaaS-based automation services in Azure to look at tags and then look at Rubrik SLA policies that Rebecca will kind of cover a little bit later on. It all just comes together in a very cohesive way. And so that's why I'm really excited to kind of show you what we have today, and this is kind of how it fits into the landscape. So with that said, let me kind of turn it over to Amy first of all to give an intro from a Microsoft perspective.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to be talking to you from actually a virtualization admin background. That's where I came from, and I saw a lot of resistance to virtualizing. as far as, no, you can't virtualize SQL, it's not going to work. Well, now I see the same thing with cloud adoption. I think we're actually getting a lot of headway now. This is kind of like the resurgence 2.0. So that poor floppy disk that's now a coaster, that's kind of where things are heading. We're starting to see cloud first adoption, then maybe virtualize second in your data center and moving workloads to the cloud. So don't be scared. I'm here to help you too. It's not scary. It's just like virtualization. That being said, Azure has 52 regions worldwide, and we're actually the first to be in South Africa. I think we did that mainly for Nick, so he could be happy. You're welcome. And that being said, that's more than AWS and Google combined. So we want to bring the data close to our customers and be available globally and make all that data available to everyone worldwide. And that brings in what we offer as a cloud. We're the only cloud provider to have a single VM SLA, so you get that 99.9, but you can also have further redundancy with an availability set. You can have your VMs in separate racks within a data center, so that's what an availability set is. There's also availability zones where you can be in entirely different data centers, but you're still in the same zone. Some of our data centers could be miles away, but still in the same region. And then for a true DR, in case of hurricane, tornado, you can do a region pair like East US to West US, so you're covered in both spots. We also have the most compliance offerings. You know, the government trusts us. We have NIST. We have all these great, FERPA, all these acronyms. So these compliance offerings keep coming up. We always make sure we're on top of the game and offering all the compliance all the compliance offerings that people need, especially GDPR, which has been the hot one lately. And not only do we have regions worldwide, but we have a diverse set of regions. We have what you're familiar with as the commercial public ones, where if you're doing a pay-as-you-go or a trial subscription, you're used to that, where there's East US, West, North Central. Then we also have public regions where the data resides within that country. So that's a good case for GDPR. You don't want it leaving your country and going elsewhere, so you can lock it down. And then we have sovereign regions where it's only citizens of the country, China, the US government. And then the last thing we also have is Azure Stack, where you can actually bring Azure to your data center and be your own region. So we have all these SLAs, we have protection built in, but disasters still happen, and here's some scary numbers of, people experience downtime, the costs, and the average downtime that someone can experience. This can also lead to you being in the news, or an impact to your brand, your stock goes down, or an impact to your career. Is it a resume generating event, and now you're on LinkedIn looking for a new job? That brings up why backup, disaster recovery, and archive, the three pillars that you use in your data center today, are still important in the cloud. Just because you have a VM or an app in the cloud does not mean it's completely protected from a virus or user error deletion. So you still want backup for long-term retention and item-level recovery in case of corruption. You still want disaster recovery so you don't have that data loss. And then you still want to be able to archive and offload it to some storage for further use or for any compliance issues. And with that being said, we have a great ecosystem of partners. We also have in-place products that you can use within Azure, but we also love our partner Rubrik, who does a fantastic job of backup, and I'll leave that to Rebecca.
Well, thank you very much, Amy. I have to admit, I've never really been a Windows person, which might be the worst thing for me to admit in a presentation with Microsoft. But that being said, I have to admit I've kind of fallen head over heels, to be honest, with Azure. I started playing with them like, oh, this makes sense. And for some reason, some of the operating systems for me personally never made sense. So it's really been interesting to me over the last year and a half, 2 years, to really embrace Azure and Microsoft. It's I feel dirty, but also I kind of like it. I don't want to, it's been fun. So when it comes to Rubrik, to kind of lay a little bit of a foundation, if we kind of go back in time when we look at data protection and data management, nothing has really changed since the 1990s. Looking at the slide, we've got backup software components to include the servers and proxies that I have to manage, not to mention media agents, replication components, a catalog database, tape, offsite storage. When you start factoring in things like, redundancy and lifecycle management for each component, the complexity can very quickly become kind of unmanageable, especially when you're considering that, backup and recovery is only one facet of a data center design or any design. So when we kind of fast forward a little bit to the 2000s, not really much changes, just the addition of deduplicated storage. So that's kind of problematic. We've not really seen a lot of innovation or change when it comes to data protection in quite some time. So basically, it's if it's not broken, don't fix it mentality. But just because it's not broken doesn't mean it can't be improved. That's like saying you trust whatever this is on my slide, this network contraption that's taped on top of something else. Why do we put ourselves through this pain? Why do I go, I don't know why this isn't working? Like, look at it. Of course it's not working well. And realistically, it's because that's the way it's always been done. All right, I spent 6 years consulting before joining Rubrik, and I can unequivocally say that oftentimes customers will choose a product that doesn't quite fit their requirements, but it's what they've always done in the past, and they're trained up to speed on it. So instead of buying the best solution, they go with familiarity. And we need to shake that mentality, because there's a lot of opportunities for us to be more forward-thinking and to create this truly defined, software-defined data center, right? Instead of just maintaining legacy. Because if not, this cartoon begins to personify what you're doing IT-wise at your office. So Rubrik, what Rubrik does is it converges all of these components into a single software fabric that's scale out and can be easily deployed as a plug-and-play physical appliance, a software appliance, or in the public cloud, right, in AWS or Azure, using what we call Cloud Cluster. So today I'm going to be focusing primarily on Azure, and you're not going to hear me really talk about AWS again, but same functionality applies as to everything else that I'm going to be talking about today with Azure. So it doesn't retain that complex, bloated architecture reminiscent of this legacy data protection solution. So again, scale out architecture that's allowing users to continue managing it as a single system and to scale out very easily and quickly with no forklift type upgrades. So installing Rubrik, if you do a plug-and-play physical appliance, it typically takes less than an hour, sometimes 15 minutes. But the key thing here is that once you get that Rubrik cluster set up, Rubrik is going to auto-discover your virtual and physical environments, such as your cloud workloads, your hosts, your VMs, your databases, and it's going to do that through APIs and intelligent connectors. So it's a very quick process to determine what you have in your infrastructure. Because the next thing I want to do is assign some sort of policy to it, some sort of SLA policy to dictate all of the components of protecting that particular workload. And Rubrik is going to orchestrate the movement of data from the initial ingest and the propagation of that data to other data locations, such as replicating to a remote cluster or to a Rubrik Cloud Cluster in AWS or Azure, as well as data archival, on premises or in the public cloud. And it's going to be that single SLA policy that's going to dictate the entire life cycle, right? So everything that's happening in terms of data movement becomes fully automated. Rubrik delivers fast data extraction, and it minimizes any kind of performance impact to the production environment, and that results in a faster backup window and the elimination of any kind of VM stun effect. And we have the ability to, with just basically a single click, you have the ability to instantly recover like a vSphere virtual machine or a SQL database by booting that, for example, SQL file directly on the Rubrik system. No additional storage provisioning is required. So from the perspective of, say, SQL, Rubrik becomes a remote data store and exposes that SQL file via the SMB protocol. And then you can simply migrate it back to your primary storage if this is a virtual machine once you have instantiated it. And then Rubrik does have a point-in-time recovery with intelligent log management. So any kind of application server files can be quickly found using our search functionality and restored to any location. And probably the part that we start to care about now would be our ability to protect cloud workloads. So we have several different types of functionality when it comes to the public cloud. First of all, we can send deduped data to the public cloud for long-term retention and still having that instant access to the data using our search function. So all data, no matter where it resides, it is indexed and it is accessible through search. Another functionality that we provide is the ability to instantiate applications in the public cloud for, say, test dev, DR, things like that. We're going to talk about those two a little bit later on. And then something that Nick's going to show you as well is our cloud cluster, right? So our ability to actually deploy Rubrik software in, say, Azure and protect all of our Azure workloads. And to be honest, it's 2018. If everything's not encrypted or we're not concerned about security, we're going to have pretty big problems. So all of the data that is sent to the cloud, it is encrypted in transit and at rest. And Rubrik stores your data in an immutable format. So that way, so should something happen like ransomware, you're able to quickly recover with no data loss. And that's going to be regardless of where that data resides. So whether it's on premises or in the public cloud or out to archive, right? From cradle to grave, we are encrypting that data. And what really initially attracted me to Rubrik was its API functionality. Because Rubrik APIs can be used to create very powerful and flexible automation workflows. And so whenever I talk to customers and prospects, one of the things that I constantly get asked is, well, what can I do? What kind of functionality is available to me via the API? What can I automate? And my answer is always anything, right? And they go, no, really? And I'm like, no, whatever you can do in the user interface, you can automate, right? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Our APIs are fully featured. In fact, Rubrik APIs are native to the platform and have been there since day one, right? So the same thing that you're doing in the UI is actually calling the underlying API. So very powerful in terms of functionality and flexibility. Nick, did you want to introduce the demo series?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. And yeah, just to kind of lead on, I can't stress enough, I'm sure Amy shares this, the APIs are what probably attracts all three of us to this product and why we're kind of focused here.
That's always my first question. That's why I've always loved Rubrik. So yeah, API all the way.
Yeah, so I think we want to kind of, get stuck in now and kind of talk about some of the specific demos and series we want to go through. And it helps just very quickly. A last slide bit here really is we break it down into three ways when we look at products now. And, given how fast we've had Azure adoption out ahead, the questions come up is, okay, well, can I use it as a target to back up to the cloud? Can I actually migrate to or restore in the cloud? And a lot of people traditionally have thought of using products, even like things like Azure Site Recovery and other things that are out there for like migration. But a lot of questions get asked is, well, can my backup product do that, seeing as the cloud is potentially my backup target? And finally, the part that we're going to kind of show you a little bit demo later on, just like, can I back up my Azure VMs with one data management platform? A lot of customers are saying, look, it's great, I can use native tools in any of these clouds, but is there a way that I can use the same system I use on premises and have more of a kind of holistic view around my data practice? And so this is really, along with the APIs that we'll cover as we get further on through this, is where Rubrik just aligned directly to these. So they have sort of specific names for it, but we have Rubrik CloudOut that Rebecca will kind of go into in a minute. Rubrik CloudOn is essentially the tool and technique they have for migrating or restoring on the cloud. And then finally, Cloud Cluster, combined with the APIs Rebecca mentioned, is really how you can get that kind of holistic viewpoint there. So, yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Rebecca, if you want to kind of kick us off on CloudOut.
Sure. So one of the things that I've noticed as I've looked at our customer base and our prospects, Rubrik customers are, simply put, they are moving to the public cloud, or they have already moved to the public cloud. And we find that all of our customers are in a little bit different kind of part of their journey. So my goal is to help facilitate that journey to the public cloud and to potentially protect workloads across on-premises and the public cloud, or just simply one or the other. So a lot of our customers are kind of in this phase one, where they're sort of dipping their toes in and seeing what cloud storage solutions, such as Azure Blob Storage, are available and what they can do with that. Well, I'm going to give you a use case in just a second of what we can do with that. And then in phase two, they're starting to basically run workloads in the public cloud. So either they're lifting and shifting, or better yet, they're refactoring those applications, or are simply cloud native at that point. And then kind of moving into phase three, this is where we're talking about a little bit more complex of an infrastructure. This is where we're running workloads across, potentially multiple public cloud vendors. We're having a hybrid scenario where we've got on-premises and in the cloud, and we're looking at mobility between, as well as just simply like multiple regions. So with CloudOut, kind of digging into that first, this is a capability with Rubrik Cloud Data Management to archive data to the cloud for short and long-term retention. So users can basically leverage Rubrik to intelligently and cost-effectively store our backup data in the public cloud. So you might say, on-premises, I really only need 30 days, but I have some sort of stipulation, maybe some compliance that I have to adhere to that says my data should actually be stored for a total of 7 years. But it's very expensive for me to store that on premises for 7 years. Well, no problem. We can absolutely archive that data after 30 days of being on premises in a Rubrik cluster to, for example, Azure. And kind of more importantly, Rubrik is optimized to provide that rapid and efficient data restore both on premises and in Azure. So data is indexed, like I mentioned earlier, by Rubrik Cloud Data Management before it's stored in Azure, which means that, if I am in a hybrid scenario where I have Rubrik running on premises and am archiving to Azure, I have the ability on premises to quickly browse for, search for, and restore, like, for example, a file, right? And so during a restore, Rubrik retrieves only the specific file that needs to be recovered. And that's because we actually store the metadata with that archive. So it allows us to granularly restore that particular file back to on-premises as necessary, and that reduces any kind of bandwidth or egress costs. So a couple of use cases. First off is customers are really using CloudOut as a solution to replace, their tape storage infrastructure, right? So the eliminating the need to copy backup data to tapes, and then they have to manually store that offsite. Secondly, this kind of helps, and we're going to see this a little bit in just a second when we start talking about CloudOn, gives us the ability to start kind of migrating and moving that data to the public cloud. And once we have that data in the public cloud, what can we do with it? Well, we can start doing things like spinning up instances of those virtual machines and do test type dev. And then, of course, we can also use this to instantiate the data. And how do we use this to instantiate the data, right? That is our feature called CloudOn. So when we use CloudOn and CloudOut in conjunction with each other, it becomes very powerful, because then at that point, if I already have that snap or that protected data stored in Azure, and then I say, great, now I want to instantiate a workload from this. If I'm choosing a point in time that's already stored in Azure, we can recover that very quickly, right? So this feature is basically enabling customers to take any VM or vSphere or Hyper-V snapshot that's been protected on premises, convert it into a virtual hard disk, and then that VHD can be used to power on a VM in Azure. So for the conversion, the on-premises Rubrik cluster analyzes the configuration of that snapshotted virtual machine to determine its characteristics such as compute, memory storage, whatever, and finds basically a matching Azure VM class that's equal or greater. But, you have the ability to, as a customer, to basically override that VM class choice. So if you say, actually, I do want to resize this workload prior to instantiation, that's absolutely possible, right, for you to do that.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most powerful features. Again, you already you choose, okay, I want to back up to the cloud, and then you just decide, okay, actually I want to restore it. Well, I can just migrate it and actually run it in Azure permanently now as well, without ever coming back on premises as well. And then, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can actually come back on premises if you want to as well, though. That's an option too.
With when we start talking about the ability of what our APIs can do, then yes. So kind of jumping into some use cases, because Nick jumped the gun here, but he's absolutely right. If I know how to, you know, I'm so terrible at animations. I don't know why I put them in slides. Like, oh yeah, I need to click 4 more times. So, you know, absolutely, we're talking about disaster recovery. If you already have, again, these snaps stored in Azure, it's just a simple, you know, couple of clicks for us to instantiate them, and it'll just take a few minutes if the data is already there, right? But we can also migrate that data. So you have the ability, you know, if you haven't archived that, to say, I want to instantiate this. Now, this is a longer process in that example, in my second example, because now we have to basically send that data, right, convert the data, and then send it to Azure, and then instantiate a workload from that, right? So there's a lot of variables there as to how long that's going to take based off of your bandwidth between basically your site-side VPN from on-premises to Azure, and how large, you know, of a disk we're talking about. So if it's already archived there, you can simply say instantiate from this point in time that's already archived, and it's quite a bit faster because the data is already stored there. This gives you the ability to do kind of a flexible DR scenario. If you wanted to simply kind of lift and shift, and then ideally, once you get everything in the public cloud, you're then refactoring and resizing and making everything appropriate for running as efficiently as possible in Azure. Or, of course, you can spin up, you know, very quickly a workload and go, you know what, I really want to test something, but I don't necessarily want to do it on premises or in the original kind of data center. I absolutely have the ability to just simply spin up that workload as a copy in the public cloud, do whatever test dev I want, and then whenever I'm done, I can just simply destroy it. That's pretty cool. So let's jump in and take a look. And here's where we get to determine whether or not I know how to share my screen.
We all get that chance.
Yes, very exciting. Dun, dun, dun. All right.
Yay.
Magic. All right. So I have already pulled up a virtual machine called Demo Windows 12-1 because I am very creative when it comes to naming. So one of the things that I wanted to point out was if we go to Manage Protection, this is already actually protected, right? So it already has a SLA policy assigned. So if I hit cancel, we can see that that is the CloudOn Azure, and then DND is do not delete, right? So me telling someone, please don't delete my SLA domain because I do have a script that runs every night to clean it up. And we see that we have this lovely overview. So this is a vSphere virtual machine. I can see my oldest snap, I can see my newest snap total, right? And I see everything that's going on down here. So I can see that it actually is successfully converting a snapshot, right, in Azure. So we see that I've already kind of started setting things up for this to go a little bit faster instead of us sitting here waiting and then listening to Nick, you know, just talk with an accent. We are actually going to, I was like, I had to get some kind of a dig in there. I was just trying to think of what it could be. So we're going to be able to see this a little bit kind of quick, a little bit more quickly because I already instantiated it, but we will kind of walk through that workflow. So it all really begins the heart of it with an SLA domain. So with an SLA domain, this is us defining all the characteristics of our protection policy. So if we say, for example, we're going to call this unicorns because why not? It's Tuesday morning. Then we have the ability to specify how often we're going to be protecting. So we want to do this at an hourly interval, daily, monthly, yearly, whatever that looks like. So, you know, for example, we could say every 8 hours. We don't need a daily, but we do need a monthly, and we need to store that monthly for 7 years. We need to store those snaps that are taken every 8 hours for, let's say, 5 days, right? So now it says my local retention is set to 7 years. To be honest, the first thing that I'm thinking is that's going to be expensive, right? And then down here in the snapshot window, I can set a window if I want to, right? A time period for when those snaps are taken. Obviously, if I'm taking a snap every 8 hours and then I set a window for only 8 hours, I would argue that you're not meeting your SLA because you've limited it and it cannot actually take it every 8 hours. It can only take it once within a period. But if you do have some kind of reason that you do need a window, you have that opportunity to do so. With Rubrik, we do a first full and then incremental forever from that point forward. So you have the ability to schedule when that first full happens, right? Otherwise, as soon as I hit create and then assign it to something, it would get scheduled near immediately. Under my remote settings, this is where I have the ability to start really kind of controlling this data flow. So again, default here, 7 years, retention on brick. Now, what I can do is I can specify archival and where I want to archive to. So we can say Azure, in this particular cluster, SE3. And then I can say, you know what, I actually only want to store things on my Rubrik cluster, in this case on premises, for, let's say, 6 months, right? Oh, almost 6 months. We're just going to call it even here. Apparently, I don't know how to use a slider bar. Oof, there we go. And then from that point forward, it's going to be archived for this amount of time until I hit that 7-year period, at which time then that data will be retired out as a part of my SLA. And again, this is all done automatically because I've already done the work to set up that connectivity to Azure. I can also choose replication. So if I have, you know, multiple Rubrik clusters, I can absolutely replicate that data between them. So as an example, I could replicate from an edge, like virtual appliance, to a physical appliance, or like a physical appliance to an edge appliance. I could do a physical appliance, you know, based cluster to a cloud cluster running in Azure. So again, a lot of flexibility here. So I just choose simply where that replication target is, and then how long I want to retain the replicated copy on the other cluster, right? Let's go ahead and turn off replication. From that point, I would just simply hit create and then go and assign that. And I have the ability to assign this hierarchically. So if we're talking about something like vSphere, I can assign this as an example to the vCenter and say propagate down to all child objects, done. Or I can get granular and go to one specific VM. And very similar as well when it comes to Hyper-V, right? I can do it at a Hyper-V host level using SCVMM, or again, granular at the per VM type level. So if we go back to my particular virtual machine that I had pulled up, I have, let's go, -win. You exist, there it is, okay. We already have this SLA assigned, and it has been protecting this virtual machine for a while, right? So I want to show you this ability to do cloud conversion. So I hit configure. What cloud conversion allows is this allows for Rubrik to automatically convert the latest snapshot of a virtual machine and upload it to Azure, right? So in this case, because this is a vSphere virtual machine, every single time that I am taking a snap, it is going ahead and converting that VMDK to a VHD and placing it in Azure. And so in this case, the VHDs are going to remain as images, and they're not going to consume any kind of block storage or compute resources until they're launched. But it's there waiting for me. So at any point in time, I can pop over into Azure and then instantiate that manually, right? I say manually because if I just simply do cloud conversion, those images are there. Now, again, using APIs and automation, I'm able to make that a seamless process. Now, I have an option here to keep older VHDs. So if I want to have all of my different points in time stored, so in this case, for every single time I have a snap and it gets converted and I want that historical data, I can absolutely do that. Or if I have it unchecked, which it is right now, then it will only keep the latest VHD. So it's automatically converting with every snap. Now, that's not really what I was referring to earlier when we were talking about constantiation. What I was talking about before with constantiation is this ability right here. So notice whenever I click this point in time, it tells me that the snap was done at 3:03. I see that it has been archived. That's what this little lovely cloud over a lovely rectangle or brick is representing. So it does have a local copy, and we have an archived copy. And I have a couple of options, right? So I can do an instant recovery, and this allows me to basically instantiate this particular virtual machine on the Rubrik cluster, right? And then it will automatically mount it back into vSphere, right, on premises, as this is an on-premises VM. Cool. And it's going to deprecate, in this case, the original VM as a part of the instant recovery process. So original VM is deprecated. We've now instantiated a copy of this point in time on the Rubrik cluster, and I would just simply storage and motion it back to my primary storage. Cool. I have the ability to do a live mount. Right, and I can do very similar functionality within Azure, right, which is Nick's going to be showing us Cloud Cluster. So it's the same, it's basically the exact same UI that you're seeing right here. And so with Live Mount, this gives us the ability to select this point in time as basically a new virtual machine. So what it's going to do is it's going to spin this up as a new VM. It's going to use Rubrik as the storage temporarily, and it's going to append the name of this virtual machine with a date timestamp. And again, it's going to spin it up in less than a minute. And now I've got 2 simultaneous workloads running side by side. Now, whenever I do the live mount operation, it does give me the opportunity to network isolate it, right? If I am concerned about any kind of name or IP conflict. And of course, again, I can automate and script all of this. So I can have it automatically do a live mount and automatically rename and do all of that fun stuff using something like Power CLI or PowerShell. Now, with a live mount, this gives you the opportunity to run this basically concurrently to the original virtual machine. That way you can do any kind of test, whatever you want to do, check, troubleshoot something, and then whenever you're done, if you want to keep it forever, then simply migrate it back to your primary storage. If you decide you're done with it forever, great. You can just simply throw it away. Browse files, right? And then what I really care about, though, is the ability to launch on cloud. So launching on cloud is this ability to on-demand instantiate this particular virtual machine as an Azure workload. So I simply go ahead and choose Azure, choose where I want to instantiate this. And then what it's doing right now is it's reaching out to that to basically verify and pull all of the networking information, all the sizing information to give me the appropriate results. So again, now it's based off of my virtual machine and its sizing. This is what it's recommending for VM size. But again, I can just override that and say, you know what, it's not what I want. I'm going to do something custom. Go ahead and choose the networking information, right? The security group. And then whenever I'm ready, I just simply hit submit, right? And it's going to kick off that process. Now, again, because this has already been archived and it already exists in Azure, it's going to take however long, right? A few minutes for it to sit there and convert it over and then instantiate that workload. Now, again, I already kicked off this operation before we even began. So if I just simply go to virtual machines now at this point in Azure, I can already see my demo Windows 12-1, and I can see all the different points in time of me instantiating this workload and having it exist and run now in Azure. So with that, I'm actually really excited to see Nick's API demo, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to him to give you a little bit more information.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Rebecca. And yeah, no, I still think, over and over, just the fact you can back up and turn something on in the cloud, I might be overly excited about it. It's fine, but I think it's really cool because a lot of people ask how to migrate to cloud. I'm like, well, if you just backing it up there, it's actually quite an easy way to get stuff there. But yeah, I might be a little biased. But anyway, moving on to cloud clusters. So that's great. I might get it up there, but then the next question is, okay, well, now how do I start backing it up when it's there? Do I use Azure Backup? Do I look at another product? Or can I get the same feel that, you just saw from Rebecca's interface? And one of the things Rubrik brought out was the ability to deploy the brick that you would typically deploy on premises. You can effectively deploy a virtual instance of that in your Azure environment. And that's really where Cloud Cluster comes in. And that really consists of, it's a 4-node Azure cluster. It uses standard D3, V2 instances, so it's not going to cost you too much a month to run. Has a certain amount of memory and storage, et cetera, associated with it. You can obviously expand that, based on your environment. So if we go over to Azure, you can see I've got a resource group. I'll scroll down called Rubrik Cloud Cluster. Oh, actually, we need to start the screen share first of all. So let me see if I can do it. So here we go.
Yeah, I wasn't the one that messed up.
I know. The guy with the accent did.
Yeah. All right. Okay, here we go. Can you see the screen? Good, okay. So yeah, in a resource group in Azure, Rubrik Cloud Cluster, and on the right-hand side, you can see it creates a couple of storage accounts in Azure, this automation account, which Amy's going to show you a little bit more of later on. But you can see, essentially, it's these 4 virtual machines here that make up the Rubrik appliance that's now running, in a network in Azure in itself. And so now I've got a jump box here, Collier Jump 01, that I just connected to, that we can take a look at. And you can effectively just log into this exactly the same as you want to, if you're doing the on-premises one, and link in those remote bricks just like you can there as well. And we go in here and we go to servers and apps. We can look at our Windows hosts. You can see I've got 3 machines basically connected in right now, and to Rebecca's point earlier, they have this SLA domain. And the way I can kind of manage that protection, I'll just kind of hit one of these, 0.9, manage protection. You can give a different file set type backups, so I can, decide on, which drives I want to include, which drives I don't want to include, have all those options there, and then choose my actual policy that I want. So, these are sort of default retention policies. Keep for 3 days, or silver, take every 12 hours, gold's, more accelerated on that, and bronze obviously not as critical. So So with that, that's kind of the, very much the same as if we're doing VMs on premises. We've got an ability to back up, Azure VMs out there. But obviously, we don't really want to kind of go in here all the time. The beauty of cloud is ARM templates, PowerShell, Azure Automation, all these things. And the first thing you can look at is Rubrik has that API Explorer. So you can take the same IP address, just add /docs/v1/playground. I love the playground option here, so you can kind of easily identify. But it gives you this ability with an API Explorer. And I've already authorized it. You click authorize, you just go in here and you put in your username and password for Rubrik. But now you can actually go and query all those things I can do in the UI. If I just want to see what the API command is for getting a list of hosts, I can click hosts, click the get command here, scroll to the bottom, and try it out immediately. And it's just run below, and you can see same thing. I've got those 3 Windows hosts, directly there. If I want to see via an API what the policies are, I can scroll back up, and if I want to see the policies for those file sets, I can go to file sets and click our get operation as well. Scroll down. I can fill in the parameters here if I want to, but essentially I'm going to just try it out, just the standard get command. And now I can see again, okay, I've got my host name here. You can see in the lab, we didn't have time to set up DNS like a proper lab here, so kind of rushed into the webinar here. But, we've got the host name, and then you've got that SLA policy. And so, directly Rubrik gives it to you just from a REST API. So everything we can do in the UI, I can do directly from here. Well, taking it a step further, they've also released a bunch of PowerShell commanders, which if you're using Azure Automation, it's built on PowerShell. So if we don't want to go and create all the REST API calls, we can essentially do this directly through PowerShell. So I can do a connect Rubrik, type in our IP that I want to connect to, put in that admin username and password again. Type it in right. So now we're connected to Rubrik. And same thing. Now I can just use simple PowerShell commands to get Rubrik file sets. And if I scroll back up here slowly, you'll see it's the same thing we saw in the API, right? It's bronze, for all those different ones. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and decide, okay, I want to change the protection policy, so I'll just pipe it to protect Rubrik file set. And let's choose an SLA, and let's go ahead and we'll actually just set them all to gold, and then I'll let Amy kind of change them back later on with her magic of automation. So I can simply just type this one command in, and I've decided, okay, for all those file sets, I just want to set them to gold. I can say yes to all. It'll go through now very quickly, hit every single one of those machines. There we go, that's complete. And now if I go back over to the Rubrik cluster, we'll just refresh it here. We can now see those are all set to gold. So it's very, very easy whether you want to do from REST API but much easier now is just using those built-in PowerShell commanders that are readily available. So if I go back now and I exit here, let's stop the screen share again for a second. And there we go. And I'm going to pass over to Amy here for a second because I think, like everyone's been saying, we've just got a love for automation, but now we do a lot of work with vRealize Orchestrator, UCS Director, things like that. But now Azure has brought out their own, unique automation technology.
Yeah, so it could be better than automation in Azure. So we do have a product called Azure Automation, and it can talk to Azure, obviously, and other cloud or SaaS-based services. It can talk within a specific environment you built, like this VNet we're showing here, and it can actually talk to your on-premises data center. And that's using this little guy, this hybrid worker you'll see, and we'll zoom in here on what the hybrid worker does. There we go. No animation. So here you can see in Azure we have the automation environment where you have runbooks where you can have either Python or PowerShell to run your scripts that like Nick demonstrated. And there's also modules. And for this, I had to install a Rubrik module so I could use the commandlets in Azure. And you can build a Windows or Linux VM, and then it'll run your scripts there. So it's a good way to keep all your scripts in one place, and you can decide to leverage it within Azure or to your on-premises environment. And with that being said, now I get the screen share. True. It will let me. 1 second, folks. Making music. I'm not using a Mac, huh? There it goes. All right. So we can see the code that Nick was using. This is what I'm going to put into Azure Automation. So we connect to our Azure account, and then we also connect to the Rubrik with our super awesome password, and we select the subscription. And then we define the Rubrik policies, like Nick showed again, the bronze, silver, and gold. So we're going to go through the resource group and make sure and look through if they're tagged for a specific policy. So for each VM, look for the Rubrik tag, the SLA. And that's pretty much it. And if there's nothing to match, then it'll write output. There's no matching policy. So if I switch screen, stop sharing. And just bring up the Azure portal. So we're Nick set those SLAs in the Azure portal to, what was it, gold? Let's see, let's change them back.
I haven't changed them in Azure. I just changed them in Rubrik itself.
Okay.
And Nick, I do want to remind you we have some polls for the audience to get a better understanding of their experience level.
Yeah, we got to fire one of those off now. It'd be good to know like just what everyone's experience is with Azure Automation. So we'll fire off that poll and answer that.
I'm just manually changing the tags here.
Yeah, so you should be seeing a poll asking for what your experience level is with Azure Automation. We're always curious when a new automation tool comes out, you know, how many people actually, A, even heard of it, you know, and B, maybe you're already pretty familiar with it.
What's great about it is you don't have to build an environment for it. It's literally just an automation account, and then you give it a run as permissions and load in your run book, and you're good to go. So it's really cool. I used to use vRealize Orchestrator to automate everything. Now I'm using Azure Automation. Right here, we're in our account. We're going to go to our run book. There's a run book gallery too. So if you chose, you know, like in other scenarios, there's a gallery of people publishing run books, and you can create your own, like we did for this demo. So here we have the Rubrik lab demo. I'm going to start it. It has that PowerShell code. I use my hybrid workers, so I can, the VM's already set, it already has the script, so it'll run a lot faster. You can use the run on Azure within Azure, and it'll kind of spin up a VM for you and run the script. It takes a little longer, you'll see it queuing, but hybrid worker is pretty cool. So choose the Rubrik hybrid, and then we should see the output. Once we click here, while that script is running, you'll see the changes being made. And this can be scheduled nightly, make sure everything's on the proper SLA, make sure your backups are being taken care of. And another thing I'd like to bring up was, you know, you can back up to blob storage. We also have auto tiering on blob storage. So you can back up and maybe say you keep it on the black blob for 30 days, and then you can actually auto tier to cool, which is even cheaper. And then even further from that, you can auto tier to archive, which is pretty much like tape, and it's pennies of pennies on the dollar. So it's so cheap. So, and you can keep it for 99 years in the cloud to archive your data. So here you see everything going through, and it's changing the policies to gold. And once this is done, we'll have Nick go back into the Rubrik, show us our SLA. Stop sharing.
Yeah, so it looks like that's completed there. So let me head over here and actually, we've got to switch the, before I talk screen share here. So Sorry, as we dance around here for a second, it takes a few seconds to swing back and forth. So what did you set the tags at? Gold. So they're already gold. So let's see. So let's three protected objects. Go to Windows host. So those are golds, which I did do with my script. I probably messed you up because I think I was supposed to set up the bronze first. But let me go back to Rubrik demo here just to show everyone how it kind of works. If we go to WinDemo01 and change this tag to say bronze. Let's try and move this guy. There we go. And save that. And then if we go and run that Azure Automation workflow again. So again, this is the Rubrik Lab demo workflow. Same script that Amy showed you from Visual Studio Code. Hit start. Run it on the hybrid worker.
You set me up. You set me up.
Let's check the output here. Let's connect it in again. So that we can listen to, Amy and Rebecca talk with their lovely accents while we wait.
I think you just wanted to talk again. You know, the demo badge didn't get me. You got me with escalate.
Exactly. Yeah, so you can see here again. So now one of them is gold because that's what the tag's set to, and the other one should be bronze. So there it is. And if we go back over to Rubrik, we can just refresh again here. With any luck. Yep, one of those is set to bronze now. So the goal being, obviously, is we don't have to now come into this dashboard at all. When we want to set our SLA policies, all we have to do is go to our virtual machines, decide which ones we want to protect with Rubrik, and then go ahead and give them a tag. So in this case, we've got that tag, Rubrik SLA. If we have other tags, obviously, Azure allows you up to 15 on an object. But simply select your tag, give it a value, gold, silver, bronze, and then that's going to set the policies for you. So I'm going to stop screen sharing again. Yeah, now where's that thing gone? Is it move screen sharing? There we go. So it's pretty interesting. People ask the responded to the poll here. So 80% of people first time they've heard of Azure Automation. 20% of people beginner. No one's intermediate or expert yet, and I think that's pretty expected given it's a new tool.
It's definitely something to play with. I highly recommend it. I believe we sent the link, but yeah, it's really simple to set up because, back in the day we had to set up servers and connections, and this is just a simple account. And we have great documentation to walk you through it.
So with that said, we're kind of running to the end here. So we've got just over 5 minutes here, which we wanted to, definitely leave open for questions. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and just throw them in the question section. I forget how it looks on your screen, but I'm sure it's there, and we'll give it a few minutes there for people to ask something.
Nick, I'd be curious to hear how many people currently have a backup and DR plan.
You know what?
So why don't we launch a poll around that?
Yeah, fired one off there. So this will be interesting to hear definitely how many people do have a current backup and DR plan. Becca, Amy, feel free. Is there anything else you guys want to add at this point?
I like the cartoon where Dilbert is their DR plan is to raise their hands and scream, and that's kind of like a lot of places I worked at. It was kind of our DR plan. I mean, we did have backups, but DR was different, so they're not the same thing for sure.
So far, one person's responded they have a backup and DR plan. So
good. Good for you.
Okay, so one question here. I guess for Amy is like, the hybrid work is sometimes how they're trying to ask us. So can you use a Linux and a Windows hybrid worker?
Yeah, you can use both. You can actually create groups. So, and that's the extent of what I know it. I'm pretty new at it as well. But yeah, you can create Windows hybrid workers for, because you're going to be using PowerShell. You can use Linux for that use case, works better for you. And you can create different groups and select which hybrid worker group to use for specific scripts.
Okay, we've got another question. Rebecca, I'm going to throw this one your way. Do you have a way to keep from purging items that are past retention policy when they are on legal hold?
Yeah, the true answer is yes, but it depends. It depends on kind of where this data is coming from, and what would be kind of the best approach. But you absolutely can extend an SLA, right, or extend the retention period at any point.
Okay, great. Well, Jay, I think that's all we've got so far. Unless anyone else has another question, we'll be here for another couple minutes here. Otherwise, I think we'll turn it back over to Jenny to kind of wrap up here. So, but thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and certainly if there are any more questions, feel free to hit us up on Twitter at ThinkAheadIT. Nick, Rebecca, or Amy will be available then to respond to you. So really appreciate the questions. Nick, Rebecca, and Amy, thank you so much for your insights. As Amy mentioned, we do have a couple of links we've attached to the webinar, including more information about Azure Automation. So with that said, thanks for your time, and this concludes our webinar.